Everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Porkins' Great Game. As always, I am your co-host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this podcast and every other episode of Porkins' Great Game by going to porkinspolicyreview.com. And, of course, joining us as he does every single month to discuss the geopolitics of Central Asia, the Caucasus, the global war on terror, and all of that great stuff is our good friend Christoph Geremeev, who is, of course, a Boiling Frogs Post contributor. Christoph, how are you?
Thanks, Pierce. I'm fine. I'm looking forward to our next episode.
Me too. And, just a quick update to the listeners. I know this is coming a little bit late, but me and Christoph were just super busy the past few weeks. So, it took a little bit of time for us to get everything together. But we are really excited for this episode, and it's going to be a bit of a Gladio B extravaganza. So I think that you'll really enjoy all of this. And there's just been so much amazing news in the past couple of weeks and months regarding Gladio B. So why don't we just jump right into it? And first we'll start with a slight update on a topic that we discussed last month, and that was the assassination of Boris Nemstov. Now, me and Christoph sort of got into some pretty good detail about the investigation, how it was unfolding, the sort of back and forth battle that was going on between Kadyrov and the FSB, and we were sort of positing some of our general ideas, but there wasn't a whole lot really to report on in terms of actual news when that happened. So we thought we would pick it up. And unfortunately, the investigation, as you were writing in one of the new Great Game Roundups, Christoph, has hit a bit of a brick wall. And there's really no clear goal in sight. The main suspect that's in custody, Zaur Dadev, who we've spoken of before, he's now recanted nearly everything he said. He's claimed that he was tortured, that he was forced to confess against Ruslan Geremeev, and that, Geremeev really had nothing to do with this, or that he was basically forced into doing, to saying that he was the mastermind behind this whole plan. His lawyer has actually stated now that Dadev will be changing his alibi, which had originally been that he was dining at a local restaurant at the time of the Nemtsov murder. Now, he hasn't given any details as to what his new alibi is going to be, so that's a bit interesting. And just to reiterate again, too, Geremeev, Ruslan Geremeev, who is seen as the sort of, as I said, the mastermind behind this, he was a former commander in the Chechen Sever Battalion, that's the North Battalion. He's a very close family friends with State Duma deputy and Kadyrov's cousin and designated successor, Adam Delimkhanov. So he's quite a powerful figure, and it's very interesting that at least the Russian regime wants to sort of place the blame on Geremeev. And that's, again, very interesting because of his close links to Kadyrov, to Delimkhanov. This is a serious player. This isn't some sort of a scapegoat. Now, as I said, there's really not been a whole lot going on, and it's still, right now, as we can tell, not clear if Geremeev has actually even been questioned by the authorities. There were conflicting reports, some saying that he was questioned, but there was no information. Others saying that he was never questioned because he was basically being guarded in this heavily fortified compound in the town of Zlaka, which is in Chechnya. So that's more or less where we are with the sort of Nemtsov murder investigation. But Christoph, why don't you kind of broaden that out a little bit and kind of explain what's going on and perhaps maybe get into where Geremeev supposedly is right now?
Yes, in our last episode, we were more or less speculating that some elements in Russia's security apparatus are trying to pin the murder on Kadyrov and his guys. But due to the recent statement by Zaur Dadev, the main suspect in the killing, we now have pretty conclusive evidence that they are actually trying to pin the murder on Kadyrov by going after Ruslan Geremeev, who has close family ties to Kadyrov's number two, Aram Delimkhanov. So that's a pretty huge issue in Russia, or has been a pretty huge issue. And as you mentioned, Geremeev was in Chechnya under Kadyrov's protection while investigators were looking for him. And it's not entirely clear whether or not they got access to him and whether or not they could question him. But they definitely could not detain him and bring him back to Moscow, what was originally the plan. And shortly thereafter, there were some reports emerging saying that Geremeev has left Russia for Dubai,
Mm.
which makes a lot of sense considering that Kadyrov, Delimkhanov, and a bunch of Chechenya's top officials just spent more than a week in Dubai while the Nemtsov investigation was inching closer to Chechnya. They stayed out of public attention for a while, and now it seems as if they have managed to avert the attack and prevail against their enemies in Moscow. But I would say that the story is still a thing to keep an eye on, and it will be very interesting to see who will be put in jail for the Nemtsov assassination, because the evidence against Dadaev is also very weak.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think this just sort of, again, illustrates how murky this entire assassination is. We speculated last month that we probably would never really figure out who was behind this, and that seems more and more apparent right now. As we were saying, I mean, the evidence against Dadev is murky at best. Geremeev is gone, possibly in Dubai. So there's really not a whole lot that's going to be going on here. But again, the FSB, the Russian government, seems very keen on putting pressure on Kadyrov and his entourage. So that is an interesting development in and of itself. And again, this might just be sort of a warning or something like that. And just quickly before we move on to the next sort of topic here, I just found it interesting that as all of this is going on in the background, we have the opposition leader and close ally of Boris Nemtsov, Ilya Yashin, who has he was one of the people that alleged that Geremeev was in Dubai. He has now helped publish and release Nemtsov's damning report on Ukraine and Putin's involvement there. Now, for anyone that hasn't read an article on this report, there's absolutely nothing new whatsoever in this report. He basically, states that there are Russian troops there, that there's Russian equipment, that, there are basically, Russian military officials orchestrating certain things that are going on in the East. This really isn't anything new. We have to assume that, yes, of course, there are some Russian troops there. Yes, of course, the Ukrainian forces are using Russian equipment. There's really nothing in this that is some sort of explosive new document. But of course, in a sick sort of way, it's only in Nemtsov's death that this, as we mentioned last month, this pretty irrelevant opposition figure in Russia has now been foisted up as the great hero, and suddenly people are reading a report that they probably would have never really paid attention to before. So I don't know, Chris, if you have any quick things on that, I just found it interesting.
Yes, you are absolutely correct. There was no smoking gun in the report. And if you recall how Western media portrayed this report before it came out, it was supposed to be the damning evidence
Mm.
against Putin for his involvement for Russian involvement in Ukraine. And now it's basically nothing new. And yeah, there has been a lot of fuss about nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, it's just there's really just nothing there. But of course, everyone from CNN to RFERL is running with this as the greatest report ever to come out. But anyway, let's move back into some of the Gladio B revelations that we've been seeing take place in the past few months, and this is one that happened fairly recently. On April 26th, Russia 1 TV aired a 2-hour documentary that was dedicated to Putin's 15 years in power. Now, in this documentary, there is a short section where Putin alleges that the U.S. supported and backed Chechen insurgents in the North Caucasus. Now, he gleaned this information apparently after intercepting communications between these militants and U.S. officials in none other than Baku, Azerbaijan. That they were, conversing, they were organizing, and so forth. Now, Putin then complained to President Bush, who promised to, quote, kick the ass of the intelligence officers in charge. And then later, the FSB received a letter from the CIA saying that they had it was their right to support all opposition forces in Russia, even, Islamic insurgents in Chechnya. Now, recently, we spoke, me and Tom Secker and Sibel Edmonds spoke about this on the BFP Roundtable. So, if you want to go there and you can get a little bit more of our analysis. But, Christoph, I was really interested in this story and wanted to talk about it again because there have been some other major developments to sort of keep in mind when you're analyzing why is Putin coming out now and saying this. And, of course, one of these was the killing of Alyashkab Kebakov, who's also known as Ali Abu Muhammad al-Dagestani, who was the recently new leader of the Caucasus Emirate. Now, he was just killed in Dagestan by Russian forces. So we have that. And then on the other side, we have a call from Abu Jihad, who is the right-hand man of our favorite ginger jihadi, Omar al-Shishani. And Abu Jihad has now called for Chechens to join ISIS in Chechnya and Dagestan and, bring the fight back home to Russia. And it's almost a joke now, but of course, when Kebakov died, the so-called Turkish charity Imkandar held a rally for him. So I sort of viewed Putin's admission sort of through the lens of those sort of major events, that perhaps this is Putin's way of sort of sending a somewhat coded message to those who understand what's going on, that he certainly knows what is the whole Gladio B program, that he has at least some evidence. Presumably he's got lots more, and he's been sitting on this for decades at least, that, U.S. officials were meeting with Chechen militants in Azerbaijan. Now, of course, the really interesting thing, Christoph, and this is where I wanted you to pick up on, is why is Putin only mentioning Chechens? And he's also, the time frame is just the early 2000s. Nothing about what was going on in the 1990s with Zawahiri, Yassin al-Qadi, a whole host of characters who were all hanging out in Azerbaijan with NATO officials. So, Christoph, what was your sort of take on Vladimir Putin's, quote, revelation of Gladio B?
Yes, his statement was very interesting, and I found the whole documentary very interesting. It begins with the Second Chechen War and Putin's appointment, and Putin at the start immediately emphasizes that there was no other choice than his hardline approach in dealing with the insurgency in Chechnya. For example, he points to communications by the so-called Chechen rebels, where they are saying that they have the unique opportunity to separate the Caucasus from Russia, now or never. And Putin says that the Russian government knew that they had to prevent this at all costs, because otherwise the whole country would have disintegrated. And many people were expecting this at the time. And Putin highlights the danger of Russia's integration, the huge arsenal of nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction which could fall into the wrong hands. And when Putin went to Gudermes in Chechnya, hour after his appointment and Yeltsin's resignation to boost the troops' morale, he also emphasized that the troops' primary task is to stop the disintegration of Russia. And he said this is not simply about restoring honor and dignity to the country, this is about how to bring about the end of the breakup of Russia. And later on in the documentary, Putin is asked which moments were the most tragic and difficult. he names the Moscow theater hostage crisis and the Beslan school siege. So terrorism is one of the central themes of the whole documentary. And Putin's Gladio B revelation comes in the part of the documentary dealing with the relations between Russia and the United States. And this part begins with Bush's takeover in Washington and how well Bush and Putin got along on a personal level. But Russian officials in the documentary highlight that the US was not happy with Russia's attempts to escape the IMF stranglehold and end its days as a US colony, as was the case under Yeltsin, basically. And there is some talk about how Russia restored its economy, and then the focus shifts again to terrorism with 9/11. And they highlight that Putin was the first to call Bush and express his condolences because Russia has also suffered from quote unquote international terrorism. And what I found really funny was the next part when Sergei Ivanov, who was defense minister at the time and who's now Putin's chief of staff, recounts how he called Putin on 9/11 and suggested that it would be a good idea to call off the drills of Russia's nuclear forces, which were scheduled for the next day. And as you all know, Putin agreed, and Russia was quick to endorse the official 9/11 myth. And I don't know whether or not that had something to do with nuclear blackmail and the huge drills of the American nuclear forces, which were going on 9/11. But I think it's very interesting that they bring it up in the documentary. And Ivanov then goes on to highlight the double standards of the US regarding terrorism by pointing out that the US was still calling the terrorists in Chechnya freedom fighters while demonizing the terrorists on 9/11. And then Putin makes this noteworthy statement about the contacts between the terrorists in North Caucasus and US intelligence in Azerbaijan. Of course, Putin says that Russian intelligence documented these contacts just once, which is obviously false.
Yes.
And he just gave the public just a small glimpse of what was really going on. But it was still significant because he mentioned Azerbaijan. As far as I know, that's the first time that a high-ranking Russian official has actually named Azerbaijan in regard to the Gladio B operations. And I think the point Putin and the documentary were trying to make with this statement is that the US is full of shit when it comes to terrorism. And that's a bad idea to use terrorists to achieve political or geopolitical objectives. That applies not only to the situation in North Caucasus in the late 1990s and early 2000s, but also to the current situation in the Middle East or in North Africa. And Putin says in the documentary, if you support terrorists in one place, they will raise their head in another. And I think he was not referring to the North Caucasus, but to the Middle East and ISIS. And as you mentioned, ISIS is now probably becoming the new enemy of Russia in the North Caucasus after the killing of Kirbakov and with the continued existence of the Caucasus Emirate in question. So I think the message they're trying to get across is that nobody should use terrorists for geopolitical means. Both Russia and China emphasize this all the time because they know that's currently the preferred weapon of the United States and its allies.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really great sort of solid, clear-cut kind of analysis. I know that a lot of people were sort of speculating, and he's going to reveal more, or this is an important revelation because again, I mean, this is probably the first and only time that we've ever heard Azerbaijan mentioned in this context. But I think it is a little bit more straightforward that this is really a piece about you're fucking crazy if you use these sort of characters, and that this really isn't the best way to achieve your geopolitical goals. And again, as you said, I mean, Putin in the documentary claims they only did this once. That's it. It was only in the early 2000s. Nothing about the 1990s when Zawahiri was in Azerbaijan. As you said, I mean, Putin was one of the first people to endorse the official story of 9/11. To this day, Putin rarely, if ever, talks about 9/11, and certainly from the detainment and interrogation of Zawahiri, other intercepted calls going on in Azerbaijan. Certainly, Putin or some people within his circle of power know exactly what was going on, but they're keeping that secret for now. They're keeping that close to the breast. So that's a very interesting point, and I think that's a great way to look at this, is not so much as a revelation, but more as a sort of a lesson perhaps that this is not a good idea, that this will eventually sort of backfire. So yeah, very very good. And again, we're going to be keeping an eye on this because it seems more and more as if the shift with ISIS is it might be going back towards Russia. As we said, Abu Jihad making this big call that everyone should go and join ISIS in Chechnya and Dagestan and start going and fighting there. So, and again, that's something we've talked about before with the possible third Chechen war going on. But maybe now we'll move on a little bit to another war on terror. And you were just mentioning before that China is not a big fan of the United States using terrorists in order to influence geopolitics. And in the past few months, there has been just an insane amount of stuff going on in and around China. We've seen an uptick in violence, not just in Xinjiang, as we've previously reported on, but throughout China as a whole, and particularly in southern China. We've also seen Turkey's role routinely been exposed in this sort of terrorist smuggling pipeline, where we've got Uyghurs coming from Xinjiang traveling with Turkish passports to places like Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand, and then going from there and settling in Turkey, and then many times eventually ending up in Syria, fighting with ISIS. Just an interesting little revelation regarding this Gladio B. There was Rohan Gunaratana, who is the head of the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research at Singapore's Nanyang Technology University. He recently claimed that over 400 Uyghurs have left, mostly through Hong Kong, to join ISIS. Now, this came just around the same time that a leaked report from the Guangdong police in southern China, in this police report, basically saying that South China is now the preferred region to funnel fighters. And a lot of this is because there's very lax border controls in South China, so it's much easier to funnel these Uyghurs to Turkey as opposed to going, say across Central Asia, where there's a much tighter passport control, and the chances of that happening are less likely. So we've got Guangdong. This is in southern China. This is not Xinjiang. This is a major metropolitan city, and we're seeing an increase of Uyghurs there. Now, if that's not enough, there was a whole set of leaflets that were being distributed to Indonesian maids in Hong Kong, urging them to not only join ISIS, but to then go and fight in Xinjiang. So this China's war on terror seems to also be kind of boiling up and turning into something much scarier. And again, we've just seen another brutal knife attack, this time in Guangzhou, which is the capital of Guangdong. And I believe several people were killed and around 12 or 13 were injured very badly. And this is, again, just after a police raid in Guangzhou that killed 2 Uyghur women and arrested 40 Uyghur terrorists. So, again, it's like Gladio B just sort of popping up everywhere right now. But, Christoph, you wrote in a recent New Great Game Roundup on a very interesting story that came from the South China Morning Post. And I think that this is really an amazing story that, again, got absolutely, zero coverage anywhere outside of, southern China. But the South China Morning Post broke this story that in late March, a terrorist recruiter posing as an American scholar at the South China Normal University in Guangzhou was basically recruiting Uyghur students there. He initially claimed to be conducting on-site research, that he was a social science researcher, and he had them fill out questionnaires and paid them for their time. Now, shortly after this, several Uyghur students disappeared, And then the authorities actually intercepted one of these students on his way to this quote American scholar, and then he confessed about all of this. Now, very odd. The university is not sure how this man actually gained security access to enter the school grounds. Apparently, there's a whole bunch of protocols. You need a special ID card. That's checked periodically. But somehow this man was able to get, onto school grounds. And as always, the World Uyghur Congress had to, address this issue. Someone called them up. This time it was the executive chairman of the World Uyghur Congress, Dolkun Issa, who admitted, again, very surprising admission, that, yeah, he had heard about such activities in universities for a while now, but he couldn't confirm this particular one. And then, of course, for good measure, he threw in that the reason it's so easy to brainwash these Uyghur students is because they're deprived of the correct Muslim teachings within Xinjiang because, of course, China closes down all these religious schools, like the ones that Gulen is trying to set up everywhere. But Christoph, what is your take on this? And again, this is another one of these sort of little peeks behind the curtain at how Gladio B is operating, and particularly in China. And please comment on this quote American scholar.
Crazy story, yes. Lately, there have been some interesting reports about Guangzhou with police breaking up smuggling rings and the like. But the most interesting report was this report about the American scholar at Guangzhou University. The title of the article was somewhat misleading. Terrorists recruited Uyghur students at Guangzhou University. And then we have this guy who claims to be a US national conducting social science research, who turns up at the university and recruits several Uyghur students and gives them money and arranges for them to fly to Malaysia. I'm not quite sure what to make of this story. They are now saying that the guy was a terrorist or a member of a terrorist or extremist group, and that there have been similar recruitment attempts at other universities in China. But I find it hard to believe that an ordinary terrorist or extremist can just walk into a Chinese university,
Yes.
claim that he's an American scholar, and then start his recruitment without some kind of check by the Chinese authorities. They are not exactly known for their lax security measures. But the modus operandi sounds very familiar. It's exactly what foreign intelligence agencies would do. When I first read the story, I immediately thought of the Gulen schools in Central Asia, which were filled with CIA agents posing as English teachers.
Yes.
So I wonder whether the South China Morning Post is telling us the whole story here.
Yeah, absolutely. I know what you mean. It's almost like it's almost too good to be true. It sounds like such a, this is the kind of story you'd be sort of dying to hear. But then again, I mean, it really does fit into the pattern of practices that we've seen in the past. And then again, I mean, we get an official from the World Uyghur Congress basically saying, yeah, this is sort of true, but it's only because the Chinese are evil. Again, it's a strange sort of admission, of what's going on. And of course, this whole issue, it particularly now in South China and with these Uyghurs, traveling onto Syria, this has to, be exploited by the CIA-backed Gulen movement, as you were just mentioning before there. And of course, the Gulen movement will use absolutely anything to make Erdogan and the AKP look bad. And they have jumped on this story of Uyghurs being transported to go fight in Syria, and they have just really kind of run with it. Now, just recently, we have a new Turkish newspaper, Meydan, which is owned by the Feza Media Group, which owns Today Zaman and a whole bunch of other newspapers, basically is the mouthpiece of the Gulen movement. And they've made a pretty fantastic claim that basically that ISIS was issued 100,000 fake Turkish passports, and that about 50,000 Uyghurs are now in Turkey on their way to fight in Syria. Now, of course, Erdogan's mouthpiece, the Daily Sabah, shot back and denied absolutely everything. Said that these numbers were completely ludicrous. That really they're just refugees that are fleeing from brutal practices in China, which again are are fairly brutal. You recently mentioned some poor guy that's in. He was jailed for 6 years recently for growing his beard too long. So yes, the practices are extreme, but there is a ring of truth in what these sort of Gulen-backed newspapers are saying. So why don't you comment on that? Because I mean, again, 100,000 fake Turkish passports—that's just too much. I mean, that would be I mean, that would be insane even for like an organization such as the CIA to orchestrate. But again, there is, I mean, some truth here. I don't doubt that this is going on, and it really does again illustrate the sort of complexities of Gladio B. And again, we get to see this sort of back and forth fight between the Gulen movement and Erdogan.
Yes, very, very funny report. In one of our previous episodes where we talked about Turkey's role in the East Turkestan project, we did mention that there have been some tensions in the Uyghur diaspora. The US and Turkey are not always on the same page when it comes to the Uyghurs, and this has led to some interesting revelations in the last few months. And I think in our last episode where we talked about the East Turkestan project, we also pointed to the interview by Rabia Kadir,
Yes.
the Washington's favorite Uyghur leader who's living in the US and doesn't have a lot of friends in Turkey, who accused the Turkish government of ignoring requests to take action against Turkey-based illegal human trafficking networks which are bringing Uyghurs to Syria and Iraq. And that's not exactly a revelation, but it's very interesting given that's coming from Kadir. And now we have this new report from the new Gülen mouthpiece Meydan, which issued this report just a few days after publishing its first issue. And they came out with a story saying 100,000 fake Turkish passports given to Uyghurs to come to fight for ISIS. That's just crazy. And the guy who talked to Meydan, who was involved with this trafficking network, claimed that 50,000 Uyghurs had made their way to Turkey via Malaysia and Thailand with these fake passports, which is, of course, completely BS. But the modus operandi rings true. We have seen actually a few of these Uyghurs making their way to Turkey with these fake passports via Southeast Asia, but the number is just insane. And then we have, of course, Gülen's mouthpiece, Daily Zaur, responding to the Gülen movement report and saying that's a smear campaign against the poor Uyghur refugees. And there are only a small number who are joining ISIS, and they do this only because they are oppressed by the evil Chinese regime.
Yes.
So it's just very funny, and the battle between the pro-Erdogan forces and the Gülen movement is again, or still in full swing, and now the Uyghurs are caught in the middle. And I think that's good for us because we might get some useful information, as was the case in the Syrian conflict when Gülen's guys stopped Turkish intelligence trucks with weapons heading to Syria and spread the story in the media. We might get some useful information about what's going on in Xinjiang and Turkey's involvement there.
Well, I just wanted to kind of and just flesh out a little bit there because again we have the CIA-backed Gulen movement on one end and the basically CIA-backed government of Erdogan on the other, and they're both sort of fighting. And I sort of wonder. Are the Gladio B sort of network operatives just sort of sitting back and just sort of watching this? I mean, they don't really care. I mean, Erdogan has constantly bemoaned every few months he asks, oh, you've got to extradite Gulen to Turkey so that he can stand trial and whatnot. And then we see the Gulen movement exposing some pretty major aspects of this sort of Gladio B operations that are going on, as you mentioned before, stopping the trucks in Turkey, right now with these fake passports. Now, obviously, the sort of this recent attack in Meydan, the newspaper, it seems a little bit overblown, almost as if this is meant to sort of expose it, but you're not supposed to take it too seriously. But I don't know, Christoph. I mean, we've come to this sort of discussion several times before. But I mean, how should we be interpreting this sort of fight right now? Because it seems like the real puppet masters are fine with letting this go on, and they're fine with little bits and pieces of the Gladio program coming out. So, what's your take on all of that?
Yes, that's the most interesting part. That was the first indication when Kadir gave this interview to Hurriyet that Washington is actually fine with exposing a few of these dirty secrets. And the same applies to the raids with the trucks in Syria um, a few months ago. It's very interesting to see that they're actually fine with exposing a few of these operations, but they they don't have to fear anything.
Mm.
I think they know that don't have to fear anything, as we have seen. There haven't been any repercussions for these operations, so they can actually go on with business as usual.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, if no one's paying attention, then who
Yeah.
cares? If it's just me and you. well, let's move on to another country that we've actually spoken about a few times before, and that is Kyrgyzstan. Now there was again just an amazing, fascinating report that came out in a Kyrgyz newspaper, Dilano, that recently reported on this extremely bizarre story. But a mysterious Ukrainian aircraft delivered 150 tons of cargo designated for the U.S. Embassy in Bishkek. Now, this 150 tons of cargo was all marked as, quote, diplomatic mail. So, therefore, it was, there were no customs inspections. No one could open what was in these crates. It was delivered in two separate flights, one on March 28th and the other on March 30th. Now, both times they were coming from Abu Dhabi, the capital of the United Arab Emirates. Now, initially, the U.S. Embassy refused to comment whatsoever on what was in I mean, how much mail could be in 150 tons of cargo. Now, the Kyrgyz newspaper, Delina No, suggested that this could be cash. Which we did see in Ukraine during the Maidan protests. There was something like $60 million in small bills that was being handed out to these protesters. But due to the weight, the newspaper speculated that it had to be more than cash, and they believed that this could be spy equipment and weapons for this brand new massive embassy that is being built in Bishkek. I think we've recently talked on a few episodes back about the closing of Manas Air Base, so therefore this embassy is going to become basically like the new Manas Air Base, and this theory of weapons was actually endorsed by some in the Kyrgyz security apparatus. And they actually pointed to the fact that there was a similar incident that occurred in 2008 when an apartment that was in Bishkek that was rented by several U.S. residents, including, I believe, two embassy officials, that was raided, and they found this small arsenal. There was 15,000 rounds of ammunition, a whole bunch of heavy artillery guns, grenade launchers, sniper rifles, pistols, and things of that nature. So now, eventually, the U.S. Embassy had to comment on this. They couldn't sort of ignore this. And they basically said that, oh, it was just mail, and that it just sort of all arrived together at once. That's not that unusual, and that there was so much of this diplomatic mail because of the great increasing cooperation between Kyrgyzstan and the United States. And there's going to be a lot more embassy officials because the relationship is just so absolutely wonderful. Now we thought this was interesting for a number of reasons. As I said, we've previously talked about Kyrgyzstan when we talked about the State Department's tech camp, which was basically the sort of a program that was being run again. It was being also run in Ukraine just before the Maidan protests, and also George Soros has visited Kyrgyzstan fairly recently, and there were many within Kyrgyzstan that were very uncomfortable about this. And they speculated that, again, there could be some sort of color revolution. Kyrgyzstan has already had two fairly recently in its history. So, Christoph, what is your take on this diplomatic mail? Because, I mean, it's not necessarily directly related to Gladio B. This could be about a color revolution, but I do wonder, why is it coming from Abu Dhabi? What if this is weapons? Who is this for? And we know that Kyrgyzstan has long been a major hub of Gladio B operations in terms of transporting fighters, in terms of heroin trafficking, and those things. So, what is your take on this?
Yes, the US embassy actually said that it was construction materials, not
Ah,
diplomatic.
okay.
So we have been talking about the possibility of a Maidan-style color revolution for some time in Kyrgyzstan. And although there haven't been any attempts to launch a Kyrgyz Maidan so far, there were some interesting developments, as you mentioned, Tech Camp project and Soros visit, and recently we had the appointment of color revolution expert Richard Miles, who
Mm.
was recalled from retirement to serve as interim head of mission in Bishkek until a new ambassador is appointed. And then we had this story which was broken by the Kyrgyz paper They Don't Know about a Ukrainian plane delivering the 150 tons of cargo. And this sent, of course, Russian media went into frenzy when the story broke. Others were more cautious because they don't know it's a sketchy source. And the US embassy initially refused to comment on the cargo. And later in the day, when they put out their statement saying that this was just construction materials, many believed it and dismissed the they don't know story. But it rings true. There are some indications that there could be more to the cargo than the US embassy is trying to say. There have been speculations about dollar bills, which doesn't make a lot of sense due to the weight, and other speculations about espionage equipment and weapons for the embassy, which makes a bit more sense. And as you mentioned, was also endorsed by a source in Kyrgyzstan security services. And we, of course, have the explanation by the US Embassy about the construction materials. And embassy spokesman told Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty that they are constructing a new building because the number of embassy officials is increasing. And he explained this with the expansion of cooperation between Kyrgyzstan and the United States. And as I mentioned in my roundup, I don't know which expansion of cooperation he is actually referring to because there is no expansion of cooperation as far as I can tell.
Mm.
But his explanation is not completely absurd. Kyrgyzstan's Foreign Affairs Committee held a meeting behind closed doors to discuss the cargo. And shortly thereafter, the Kyrgyz foreign minister told the media that the cargo really included only construction materials and that they had given permission for the delivery and that this wasn't the last cargo shipment of construction materials for the embassy. So they were expecting this shipment is what they are now saying. Whether or not they made a deal, some kind of deal with Washington behind the scenes to keep this under the table, is anybody's guess. But it's of course possible that they are really telling the truth, and we are reading too much into this 150 tons of diplomatic mail, which sounds, of course, completely crazy when you hear it for the first time. But the US has been expanding its embassy in the country ever since it became clear that they would be kicked out of Manas Air Base. And so far, they have not launched the Maidan in Bishkek, despite all indication. So maybe they are really telling the truth this time. I don't know. Quite sure what to make of this story so far.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, the worst thing you can do when you're trying to analyze, geopolitics and events like this is to, jump to the conclusion that, oh, this is all, this right, that this is all, this is like $1 million or whatever in cash and other and weapons and spy equipment, and they're gonna take over the country. But again, it is worrying, and it does seem to fit in this trend. So I think we're going to have to kind of return back to this again. And it was interesting you were mentioning in your roundup this increasing cooperation. And in reality, I mean, there is no increasing cooperation.
Yes,
I mean,
on May 8th, Kyrgyzstan officially became a member of the Eurasian Economic Union and cemented its ties with Russia. So it's clear that the US is not happy with that, but it won't be easy to remove Kyrgyzstan from Russia's sphere of influence.
Absolutely, and again, I mean, the U.S. was kicked out of Manas airbase. I mean, that is a huge blow to them. And as you were saying, yeah, I mean, the Eurasian Economic Union. I mean, it's a whole bunch of things. So it does. I think it's something that you should look at, and that we should be concerned about what's going on there. But I think that's probably good for today. So why don't we move on to our final story? And as we do every month, we always try to pick something that is just so bizarre and weird and creepy in this sort of world of this global war on terror. And that was something that happened very recently, and this was just about a few weeks ago. But America's favorite cult leader, Maryam Rajavi, who is head of the MEK cult, testified to a congressional hearing on combating ISIS, of all things. Now, for anyone that doesn't know, the Mujahideen cult is an Iranian cult that was founded by Rajavi's husband, and Rajavi's husband has since disappeared from public view. And now Maryam Rajavi runs this cult, of course, from the comfort of her Paris compound. People might be familiar with the MEK at Camp Liberty, which is this base in Iraq where a whole bunch of the cult members still live. A little bit of background: the MEK actually participated in the revolution that took place in Iran. And then the Ayatollah actually thought that the MEK was too crazy even for him. So he kicked them out of Iran. The MEK popped up in Iraq, where Saddam Hussein instantly embraced them, and then suddenly they loved Saddam Hussein because they are a cult; they don't really care. And the MEK actually helped to gas and butcher many of the Kurds during the Iran-Iraq war. Then Saddam got kind of pissed off with them, and they sort of switched allegiances yet again. But they have. For a variety of reasons, I guess, the MEK has become one of the premier, quote, opposition groups that Washington has been propping up. Now, they were just recently on the State Department's terrorist list because they had murdered a whole bunch of American citizens, not to mention that they were butchering the Kurds, they were helping to gas them, they've done absolutely horrific things to their own members, and Hillary Clinton, God bless her, helped to actually get the MEK delisted. And the MEK is also very famous for paying massive amounts of money to have everyone from Rudy Giuliani to Howard Dean, to basically everyone under the sun, Bill Richardson, what's his name? Crowley, former State Department spokesperson. They give them a massive amount of money to go and speak to these massive cult rallies in Paris where everyone is wearing the exact same clothing, everyone is chanting, and they really are just a straight up cult. This is even, mainstream publications have have made this assertion. Now, again, why the hell was Maryam Rajavi invited to speak about ISIS? I have no idea. And of course, she suggested that by overthrowing the government in Iran, that would just stop ISIS in about a day. Because again, everything with Rajavi is about Iran, this evil regime that's oppressive to women. Of course, she is a cult member where women are routinely brutalized, raped, brainwashed within the MEK, but again, Iran is the ultimate bad guy. And her participation in this congressional hearing actually caused quite a stir. We had counterterrorism coordinator Daniel Benjamin withdrawing completely from this panel, and Benjamin was actually one of the people that was instrumental in getting the MEK delisted, but felt extremely uncomfortable about testifying alongside her. And another person who was invited was former ambassador to Syria Robert Ford, who actually told Al Monitor, quote, "What the fuck do the MEK know about the Islamic State?" So, Christoph, this is just like one of those bizarre stories, and again illustrates how much Washington absolutely loves cults, and they are willing to embrace them at at all costs. The same way they've embraced the Unification Church, they've embraced Scientology, Jim Jones and the People's Temple, and the MEK is great because they're seen as progressive and against Iran. But what was your take on the Rajavi testifying?
Yes, I think it's quite funny that Robert Ford, the guy who has been championing every terrorist gang fighting in Syria for more
Mm,
than 4 years, is now upset because another terrorist gang is testifying in Washington.
yes.
And Daniel Benjamin, the guy who helped delist MEK from the terrorism list, is also upset. I
Mm.
think they should finally embrace their terrorist friends and be more upfront about the whole thing. But they are, of course, right to question why the MEK was invited to participate in a discussion about ISIS.
Mm.
But I guess MEK leader Marjam Rajavi proved why she was invited, and because she lost no time in arguing that the only way to defeat ISIS is regime change in Iran. That makes a lot of sense given that Iran and its allies are the only ones really fighting ISIS.
Yes.
I think regime change in Washington would probably be more useful in defeating ISIS than regime change in Tehran, but that's just my opinion. I think
Mm.
this whole MEK invitation was completely ridiculous, and as Benjamin pointed out, it was probably intended to help rehabilitate the MEK, which is pretty insane. The MEK is a very dangerous and crazy terrorist cult, and to present this group as a viable alternative to the Iranian government is ludicrous.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely, and this just seems, like all good cults, all powerful, destructive cults, always go through a period of rehabilitation when things get very bad for them. Now, the MEKs, spent millions upon millions of dollars lobbying Washington to get delisted. Now they have been delisted, so now they're going to sort of, oh yes, we're against ISIS now, and we want all of these progressive values in Iran, and the mere thought that anyone even within Iran, even the people that hate the Ayatollah or that whole government despise the MEK. I mean, they are so far from having any support whatsoever. But it is very terrifying that we see just a who's who of Washington insiders propping up this insane, destructive cult. So a very bizarre story, and I promise that we will definitely be returning to the MEK anytime they pop up. I'm always interested, and I think I'm actually going to be working on a full podcast on my main show all about the MEK because it does seem as if there could be some serious developments there, and the cult could actually be, now that it's delisted. It's sort of the world is their oyster, and we saw this. There's been some other cult news. With Scientology, it was the same thing. Once they got tax exempt status, they just went hog wild. So the MEK is certainly primed and ready for that. But I think we're going to leave it there. And I just want to say once again, Christoph, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. And to all the listeners, thank you so much for tuning in and listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and you would like to hear some more, then please go to porkinspolicyreview.com where you can find this podcast and every other podcast. And of course, if you need to get your daily dose of all of this sort of amazing information, and of course, there's so many more stories that we don't get to cover every single month, then you have to go and check out the new Great Game Roundup. And Christoph, please tell the listeners where they can go to read your excellent blog.
Thanks, Piers. Yes, you can find my work on my blog, christophgerman.blogspot.com, and on Boiling Frogs Post, and also on Russia Insider.
Excellent, excellent. And again, if you want to tweet me and Christoph any ideas for episodes or things like that, then you can tweet me at Porkins Policy, and you can of course tweet Christoph at New Great Game. And I know I got a tweet from a good listener of mine who likes the show quite a bit, asking us to discuss this recent Seymour Hersh expose on Bin Laden, and me and Christoph are going to be discussing that at some point in the near future. Perhaps as a little bonus Porkins Great Game episode, we might be discussing it on the new Boiling Frogs Post roundtable. But I think me and Christoph are going to kind of hold off on that because we want to sort of figure out exactly what the hell Seymour Hersh is talking about there. But anyway, once again, thank you all so much for joining us, and we will be coming back to you in just about a month with a whole new host of topics and amazing stories. So thank you so much, and Christoph, thank you.
Thank you, Piers.
over here, girl. It's good to see you around right here, girl. For what I found, it's your lover, and I'm just your style, not forever, at least for a while. Baby, come right now. Baby, come right over. Baby, do it now. Baby, come on closer. You're really turning me on. Come closer. You won't be wrong. Give your body the whole night long. Come over where you belong. Baby, I need your loving and right now. Baby, I need your loving right now. Won't you come with me? I'd like to show you around to a party or fool around in your body the whole night long. Come on over, you won't be wrong. Baby, I need your loving right now. 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 I need your loving and right now. Baby,